And so we interviewed 36 candidates in targeted races. And essentially, I'm being quite blunt here. The individual candidates were essentially a vehicle to execute a political objective, which was to tilt toward Madigan. So the press never picked up on it. We endorsed 9 individuals, and 6 of them were Democrats, 3 Republicans, and tilted our money toward Madigan. That was really a show of an indication to him that we could be a new partner to take the place of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. That was the point. Luckily, it never got covered that way. That wouldn't work well in Illinois. Madigan's not particularly well liked. And it did work. After the election, Advance Illinois and STAND had drafted a very bold proposal we called Performance Counts. It tied tenure and layoffs to performance. It let principals hire who they choose. It streamlined dismissal of ineffective tenured teachers substantially, from 2+ years, $200,000+ in legal fees on average, to 3 to 4 months, with very little likelihood of legal recourse. And most importantly, we called for the reform of collective bargaining throughout the state, essentially proposing that school boards would be able to decide any disputed issue at impasse. So very, very bold proposal for Illinois, and one that 6 months earlier would have been unthinkable, undiscussable. The next day, he created an education reform committee, and his political director called to ask for our suggestions of who should be on it. And so in Aurora, Illinois, in December, out of nowhere, there are hearings on our proposal. In addition, we hired 11 lobbyists, including 4 of the absolute best insiders and 7 of the best minority lobbyists, preventing the unions from hiring them. We enlisted a statewide public affairs firm. We had tens of thousands of supporters. And with Jim's and many others stepping up, Paula and Steve, thank you, we raised $3 million for our political action committee between the election and the end of the year. That's more money than either of the unions have in their political action committees. And so essentially what we did in a very short period of time was shift the balance of power. And I can tell you there was a palpable sense of concern, if not shock, on the part of the teachers' unions in Illinois that Speaker Madigan had changed allegiance and that we had clear political capability to potentially jam this proposal down their throats the same way pension reform had been jammed down their throats 6 months earlier. So here's what ends up happening at the end of the day. April 12th, we're down to the last topic of collective bargaining. It's been saved for last. It's the hardest topic. We fully expected that our collaborative problem solving of 3 months would end, and we would have an impasse and go to war. And we were prepared. We had money raised for radio ads, and our lobbyists were ready. Well, to our surprise, and with Rahm Emanuel's involvement behind the scenes, we were able to split the IEA from the Chicago Teachers Union, essentially isolating Chicago and calling for binding arbitration or fact-finding process that wasn't binding but would have a high threshold for unions to approve. We came with a fallback of binding arbitration when we saw that the Illinois Education Association was willing to do a deal and just focus on Chicago. They, interestingly, pressured the Chicago Teachers Union to take the deal. Karen Lewis, the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, who's a diehard militant, was focused on maintaining her sense of her members' right to strike. Her sense was that binding arbitration was giving away the right to strike. But our next proposal, our next best, which was a very high threshold for strikes, for whatever reason, tactical miscalculation on her part, was palatable. Rahm pushed it. Kimberly Lightford pushed it. We'd done our homework. We knew that the highest threshold of any bargaining unit that had voted one way or the other on a collective bargaining agreement on a contract vote was 48.3%. The threshold that we were arguing for was 3/4. So in effect, they wouldn't have the ability to strike, even though the right was maintained. And so in the end game, the Chicago Teachers Union took that deal, misunderstanding, probably not knowing the statistics about voting history. And the length of day and year was no longer bargainable in Chicago. And a liberal Democratic governor who was elected by public sector unions, that's not even a debatable fact, signed it and took credit for it. So we talk about a process that ends up achieving transformational change. It's going to allow the new mayor and the new CEO to lengthen the day and year as much as they want. The unions cannot strike in Chicago. They will never be able to muster the 75% threshold necessary to strike. And the whole framework for discussing impact, what compensation is necessary, is set up through the fine print that we approved to ensure that the fact-finding recommendations, which are non-binding, will favor what we would consider to be common sense. And now it makes it hard for folks leading unions in other states to say these types of reforms are terrible, because their colleagues in Illinois have just said these are great. So our hope and our expectation is to use this as a catalyst to very quickly make similar changes in other very entrenched states.
Is that there was actually never a special interest advocacy group that was focused on pro-children education reform. There was not a special interest for that cause. And that one did develop was instrumental.
Our first focus in Chicago is going to be ensuring that the district is able to follow through on the instructional time increase. Now, while the rules allow the mayor to increase instructional time, it can't become something that's a terrible issue for him politically. So we have to organize and mobilize the support to make it a winner politically. So we'll be there to support the mayor in that. We also want to get parents engaged in the topic, because top-down change only without an educated group of consumers only goes so far. So we're hoping to have tens of thousands in a discussion around how time should be used in Chicago, so that when the mayor comes forward, be it September or next spring, to enact a longer day and year, that there is a community groundswell of support.
You may be hearing about this topic again because of that, and trying to lengthen the day with paying people while paying people no more is obviously going to stress things.